That's us in that little strait of waters between Australia mainland and Papua New Guinea. Later on I'll show you a map of closer up where that is, including Boigu. Is when they talk about the top end here. You don't get any further top end than Boigu Island. That's the furthest north you can go in this country. So yeah, that's the context for us. A crappy map with a lot of stuff on it, but basically you can see that everything means something to someone in a certain region or island up there. But there are basically over a couple of hundred islands, islets, cays in the region. It's, as you see, something like 40,000 square kilometres of sea country, 91% of it's ocean, only about 2% of it's actually land when you add it all up. I can thank Monica for those figures from way back in the Surviving Columbus conference we had here 20 years ago. And the rest of it's fully inundated reef systems all throughout. As you can see, the Barrier Reef, jurisdiction on the far right of the screen there, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, jurisdiction ends sort of parallel with Cape York there. And the reef still continues, it's part of our waters. All sorts of areas that are covered by myriad lines and maps and you'll see when I show you the next slide just why that is, where we are. So I'm just going to go a bit into the TSRA, who is my employer. Chaired, we have two basic wings of it. One is the administrative wing we work for, the arm that is elected, that Joseph Ilu is the chairman of. So I won't go into too much stuff there, but that's basically how we fit into the larger scheme of things. We've got a whole bunch of program areas that we're responsible for that are broken up into those boxes, and that's us down the bottom there. That dugong did get away. A lot of our planning and direction comes from communities. I just thought I'd flash up a couple of little booklets. We spend a lot of time liaising with communities, community meetings, discussing what their aims and objectives are, what their aspirations are, and building them into how we do our business. Another very messy map, but just showing the full range of stuff. We do a lot of fishery stuff. We look after a lot of health stuff, and basically it's because we're the only international border this country has with Papua New Guinea. And whilst there might be free movement of traditional people that can come and go without visas and passports and stuff, it also means they have to be very vigilant about diseases, pests. Of course, there's a native title area that's huge to us. We have 21 PBCs in that region alone, and we need to do, unlike a lot of government agencies, our work obviously is on country. We have to do a lot of very careful, proper consultations all the way along until we can set foot on land in the Torres Strait. Okay, we're moving down a little to the section that I highlighted before, the Land and Sea Unit. Can I hear okay, Luke? We started in 2005, our little unit with 5 people. Lockie over there works in South Australia now, one of our originals as well. And we've now grown to 69 staff since we put on mostly rangers. I think we're about 48 rangers now. So the larger part of the TSRA organisation, we were the smallest. We are now more than half the whole establishment. So we've got rangers everywhere. So we now, Damien has to manage a system that has 69 rangers based across 15 offices throughout the Torres Strait, and we also have an office in Cairns. That gives us the advantage of being able to deal with a lot of the researchers and bureaucrats and face-to-face as well. So we've got a very stretched coverage. That's not all the more, but anyways. Okay, so within the LSMU, the Land and Sea Management Unit, we have a number of themes that we can fit all the interests and projects that we have within. You right there, Bola? I'm falling asleep? Okay. All right, so here we go. We've got a range of things there, and we'll eventually get down to the TEK, as you can see, that fits within the people theme of our operation. The newest one to that is the coast and climate. We have a guy who's a specialist on climate change and all the impacts of that's associated with, particularly our marine biodiversity. I'll cover a bit more of that later. Okay, a little bit on the projects that the land people do. Terrestrial biodiversity, pretty important for us given where we are and given the fact that there's, as you know, through Asia, archipelagos that join down to the PNG and then archipelagos across the Torres Strait. So it's a quite biodiverse sort of region, land and sea-wise. Invasive species, we do a lot of work with that, but so does the quarantine mob for the government. We work in closely with them. A lot of our operations deal with partnerships. And of course, the Sustainable Horticulture Project, one of the issues we deal with is you can take fresh food and veggies into the Torres Strait Islands, you can't move anything out. So very restricted what we can do, but we're trying to encourage nurseries and gardens on each community so that they can grow their own fresh vegetables and fruit. Some shoreline work that the rangers are doing, Mangrove Watch, some fire projects, little nursery garden. We do a lot of stuff with Tagai school kids. Andrew was facilitated originally for that. He's now a Kabrumpa guy, but we can thank him for bridging good close ties with all the Tagai schools throughout the Torres Strait as well. And of course a lot of weed management issues. Sea theme, we have a couple of our reps here. Stan Louie and Frank Loban and Ron Fuji run this program. Not many dots up there, but it's a huge program. A lot of consultation, a lot of emotion, and lots of work needed behind the different agencies that are involved in it, fisheries and environmentally. The other thing about that, I'll talk a little bit more about it later, is the fact that when we try and develop our management regimes, we, as you know, need to include all stakeholders. And one of the difficulties we have is this happens to be a border that divides a lot of our stakeholders. So we do a lot of work with PNG people so that we're all on the same page as well. We have the most extensive seagrass beds in the world, and consequently very strong and healthy dugong turtle populations. We can have a discussion about that a bit later, but nothing due to us, but just the fact that Queensland's been through lots of environmental issues, cyclones, etc., and a lot of river runoff, so there are issues that impact on us. As you probably know, we are also opposite Papua New Guinea south coast, which has a lot of big major systems. Fly River's 6th biggest river in the world. Lots of mining companies in the hinterland there, and that stuff comes into our area, so we're always looking at that. We also have a major shipping channel through there, so it's always a concern for us. Accident waiting to happen, so we just got to be careful of we're keeping an eye on all that stuff. It's like, some people say it's like having someone just being able to walk and drive in and out of your backyard. We don't have a lot of control in some ways. There are systems in place that for monitoring those things, but certainly going to get a lot more worse given all the developments in Queensland around mining and gas production. So it's that, as you remember from that map, a skinny little gap through there and a lot of traffic. Once they've come through, they tend to either come in the inner barrier or outer barrier. However, the traffic and the inner and the barrier all come through Torres Strait. So we get maximised impacts. I quickly flashed that one up because it just shows the different jurisdictions for managing turtle and dugong, and the way we've done that is to develop plans with the community, so they have a big say in how they want to cover off on issues. They have, for instance, closures different times throughout the year, different seasons. They talk a lot about how you hunt sustainably. They talk about regions where you can and can't hunt. We have a major sanctuary that unfortunately isn't marked on that map, off to the west of those islands towards the bottom there, and going up to the next group up in the lower western group. Major sanctuary there, and lots of dugong, turtle, seagrass beds. Lots of tagging. That one's at Bramble Cay, which is way up in the, right on the border, up in the top northeast. There's also all sorts of other little finds that people have found there. Melamies, rats that are apparently only endemic to that area. So we do lots of monitoring of those funny species, little furry things running around there. And once again, lots of liaison with communities about any changes or any discussion that we have about planning around. That one in particular is the turtle dugong meeting on Boigu. And we tend to use our highest representatives in the organisation, and as well as our guys working at the coalface. All right, as I mentioned, this one is probably a more recent issue of ours that we're having to deal with. Not that it's a new one, but certainly in the Torres Strait we've had a noticeable acceleration of erosion in the place on those islands. And whilst you can say a lot of sand cay ones are dynamic, they're moving slowly, a couple of centimetres every year south. And when we have communities that are fixed and lots of major infrastructure, sewage treatment plants, water supplies and everything there, big issue for us to try and help people work on keeping their community. So all the other things I mentioned with the work we do mean absolutely zero if there isn't an island there for someone to live on, and you know, at the end of the day anyway. So a constant concern of people is this the shifting coastline, and unlike the mainland where you can retreat, we don't have that luxury. So we've got to kind of, and you can put up a biggest wall you like in front of it, it's still going to come around the back. So that's just the nature of this issue. So we have a whole bunch of different programs to deal with short-term initiatives, and that's hugely important to the people on that community, of course, because that's all their major concern is that. But there are, of course, when you're working on climate change impacts, longer-term prospects that need to be addressed as well. So absolutely important to have short-term and longer-term programs to combat these things. Absolutely important to include traditional knowledge, because other people that have been living on there, we can get the greatest scientists in the world, but they still need the knowledge of people who observe changes every day to make a good call. We're just this little skinny bottleneck between two oceans, a lot of changes and impacts that aren't witnessed anywhere else on just a major coast. We have odd tides up there and all sorts of things to deal with. So that's an island way up the top that borders on the mainland of PNG. As you can see, we can build a 50-foot wall in front of it where those villages, just a skinny isthmus that goes for about 1.7 kilometres on the northern side of the island, facing Papua New Guinea. The people there have done, and there's no rocks on it, this is a mud island, so they have to import everything to the place to be able to do anything. What they've done themselves in the past is just got old coral and try to build walls. I mean, it takes a hell of a lot of good engineering to make something that's longer lasting. So we're working with them on how to do that. As you can see, all swamps behind there, so as I say, you can build a huge wall in the front. We still need to deal with the back side of it all. So a whole bunch of engineering works happening around there to drain the place quickly. we probably really only face it on big problems on king tides 2 or 3 times a year. But impacts from things like a cyclone in the Gulf can just make it a long way from that, but we certainly notice the impacts of them. Still a lot of data we need to collect. So we've got tide gauge projects around the place to get accurate stuff. There are all sorts of different figures we get, but the reality is they've never been accurate from what people's observations, the traditional knowledge on those communities have been telling us. So we're trying to marry up those partnerships a lot closer. Just flashed that one up to show that there are a hell of a lot of reports and studies we do on this sort of stuff. That can be hugely frustrating for people in the communities. All they see is scientists coming out there and taking off and coming back with nice little books. But that's why the importance of having something tangible, short-term, upfront, so they can see visibly we're doing, has to be worked in with the longer-term projection work that we do. Okay, this is our newest but biggest flagship program, I guess. And there are a hell of a lot of projects that these guys are involved in. There's a hell of a lot of training as well. And Nelson can talk a bit more about what he does as a senior ranger up there on Boigu. We recently got some huge purpose-built vessels for the place, different sea conditions there to outside Darwin here, different tides, different types of waves. So we've actually spent a lot of time. We've had past disasters of people being lost at sea quite often. We've made it very clear we're not going to get into that situation. We may seem to be going a bit overboard with our safety issues, but it can never be too safe. It's always predominant in all the work we do there. Guys getting rid of some weeds and invasive species control. Jenny Macklin came up, the minister, to bless the first of the vessels that we launched there at Boigu Island. I think she needed a few lessons in how they do blessings up there. They use a young green coconut, and poor old minister just went splat, splat, and covered in. I went to one recently at the latest boat we had at Boigu, and we got some elder ladies to do it. And I just thought, here we go, these guys must know more than the minister about some things. And they were great. I just know how to crash a green coconut without getting splashed. So there you go. Hugely important, as I said, 91.2% of the place is sea. The land and sea management, the land and sea rangers, we have tended up until a year ago to concentrate on, because we've not had rangers as opposed to down south. We don't have national parks up there, so we've never been had the luxury of recruiting permanent staff to look after country. Just been something that communities do on their own. So we, now that we've got these vessels, we've got a lot of work out there. We've got some remote places, IPAs, Indigenous Protected Areas. Now these guys can get out without us having to spend a lot of money chartering boats to get out to some of these places. As well as the program stuff I showed you, we have partnerships with other scientific research organisations. I've just listed a few there. And they all involve rangers. So we have a reef monitoring program with the Australian Institute of Marine Science. Amos there is recording from some dives there, the types of coral, the coverage, crown of thorn, starfish infestation. So that's a model that's very recent for us, but the guys are very keen to be able to get some of that knowledge and put their stuff into joint programs as well. Mangroves Wetlands, always important. Some of our islands, as I showed before, have fairly big wetlands. And of course, our southern coast of PNG, huge wetland country, monstrous. Mangroves, you all know the importance of mangroves to ecosystems. I just might talk a little bit about the range of communities we have in the Torres Strait as well. Towards the east, you'll find a lot of volcanic islands, not a lot, but that are right out near the barrier reef. Then we have sand cays, just like Green Island or any other ones along the barrier reef, that we call our central group. Then we have a lower western group, which is just an extension of the Great Dividing Range that runs up the spine of Queensland. And when the land masses were joined, they were just the hills in those places that have now become our Torres Strait Islands. And where Nelson comes from, in the top western group, we have islands that are formed from reef platforms opposite big rivers and PNG. So very much alluvial mud that have built up over the decades, centuries. And so quite diverse, different kinds of areas. Water quality, always an issue with us, once again being neighbours with PNG, big mining companies up there, all sorts of, there have been some major projects done on the outflow from there, but also looking at what pollution might be created locally. I'm going to 10 minutes, 15. Okay, so I'm trying to, I'll speed it up a little. I want to get some time for you guys to ask some questions. The PNG, as I said, we have a thing called the Torres Strait Treaty, which allows for some free movement of traditional visits. So we have lots of meetings with those guys. They might be fisheries related, they might be immigration related, they might be health related, but we do have those village to village, community to community meetings on one level, and at the other level, at the higher level, we have a whole range of different meetings every year with our counterparts in PNG and with the Foreign Affairs departments as well. I mentioned that because, as I've said before also, you can't plan anything unless you involve all stakeholders. So because there's a line there that sort of has these stakeholders across it, we have to make sure that we share a lot of information to manage properly. Okay, people theme, I've left that for last because, as you can see, what we will be talking about lastly, mostly, is the Traditional Ecological Knowledge Program. There are a couple of other ones that fit within there as well. We have the Indigenous Protected Areas. We've got 2 in the Torres Strait. I'm sure you've heard a lot about IPAs through other talks here. And we've got another one on the way, almost declared. A little bit more work to be done, and hope to get that one up shortly. Cultural heritage issues, I've got that separate. They're not obviously separate from those first 2 dot points, but in terms of how we work, we have to deal with another section of our organisation that deals more with the cultural heritage parts, the arts and dance parts, and they're all integral to the dance and stuff are all around animals, flora, fauna and stuff as well. So we have to liaise not only with communities but also with our other sections of the department. That's an IPA at Pulu, near Mobiak Island. We've done some recording just for maintenance and preservation knowledge, and tagging on another IPA at Warralkawa that Nelson's people look after. Okay, so I'll quickly move into the TEK part of our talk. Bit of an outline there. We've done a pilot, so I'm not a great expert in this thing yet. We've just started with a pilot. We've had that going for 2 years now, son? 2 years now at Boigu. And not an easy place to work from Boigu. They don't have mobile phones or anything, not very good internet access. However, we found that to be secondary to the basis for a good TEK, which is to make sure that on ground, the prescribed body corporates, the traditional owners, the government agencies and our rangers are all able to work cooperatively to come up with systems to make it work properly. That was more important to us than the technology, which will be coming along later. But just want to say that both of those are important, but not as the highest importance is to make sure that culturally everyone's happy with this program that we put in. So we had a pilot there. We're in the process now of expanding to 4 more, which took a hell of a lot of consultations to make sure that we're not seem to be cramming the system on people that don't want. And Nelson will tell you about what people see there when they're weighing up the the benefits of it all, as opposed to their concerns about having a program where they're putting all their traditional knowledge that's been in their heads and passed on verbally to their families, all of a sudden on a computer database. Next one. Just flash up a quick one there to show where Boigu is. As you can see, right up there, most northerly community in the country, right along adjacent to those big rivers that aren't shown on there. And further down, those other islands down halfway along are the ones that we're currently expanding to. So we'll be there forever if we're doing one at a time, but we've done a pilot. This was our methodology, and we're now rolling out clusters. Lower Western will do a central cluster and an eastern cluster in the future years, and eventually get coverage only for those places that want to have this program. So we actually have 3 meetings with them to make sure we don't just go and say, yeah, we don't go for the quick tick. We go back, give them time to think about it. We usually stay in the community so we can talk to them, mingle and have a good yarn about it. Okay, so quickly what it is for our system. I know these things exist all around the world. I was on a committee that actually found ours. We had 15 different consultants apply, and we chose a group that we felt could develop a program for Torres Strait. We didn't want to copy someone else's. We had our own criteria, which were mostly about absolute protection of this knowledge. It was most important. I know some of the others had sort of secondary protection where you could say, oh, we just won't tell people. We wanted to make it all very clear that legally this stuff is owned and controlled by the community that you can get involved in it. So a quick run through of when we, as you can see, only just happened, had negotiations with traditional owners about it. We got some funding from SOPAC to get this pilot up and running. We hired a consultants, Environmental System Solutions. We can talk a bit more about it. Sorry, Catherine may be able to give us some more, having been involved in that. Began our project in 2011, and we're currently doing the further rollout. Okay, I'll just hand over to Nelson to give you a bit more of a talk about someone who's been more hands-on and personally involved in it all from a community perspective.
Kapaputayang Raboy, La Kapapudiz, Gagata Pukulmail, Lariki Nation, Kulaikai Pepa, Kursibakai. This is mean good morning, everyone. Let me begin to acknowledge traditional owners of Lariki Nation, past and present, where we are gathering today. The picture was taken in front of Boigu Island Council office when the TEK program was started at Boigu Island. Let us stop this.
The most important point I'll make with this one is the fact that we've developed to run this whole show a thing called a knowledge guardianship kit, which gives total control for all the people. Nelson will tell you a bit more about that, but when you go into the community, it's not a simple matter of someone signing off on some information. We try to decide on who will be able to see what. So there's lots of discussion and development of a program that these guys own. They control who sees what. That might be the differences maybe between elders or adults and children. The difference might be between different clans, sub-clans, and only some people can see some of those things. There may be parts of it that they can put blocks on just for their own families themselves, individuals. So we've developed this thing. Sounds very complex and probably is to a degree, but absolutely critical. The main points that came from everywhere we went, even in our more recent consultations, was that they want it because they're concerned about the loss of knowledge as elders were passing on. but the concern about the security of the information. And so this part of it, the security of the information, huge to everyone. Just let Nelson talk a bit about.
As you can see the picture up there, it's all about information gathering. One is gathering the information from elders of the community. Every information, name from the land, sea, even the sky. Before we put it into TEK database, we always come back to our elders of the community and native title corporate body to give us a green light to whether it's negative or positive to put it into TK database. You can do voice recording, video recording, tape recording, site marking, it's all of that. This is a picture of tip of Boigu Island, face towards Papuan coast. Papuan coast is just 6 kilometers from our home, our island. Yeah, that's me there in front of churchyard. Boigu Island churchyard there. Okay.
We were doing an interview about a sacred tree there. Special tree there. Okay, just a quick run through. I'm running out of time. As I mentioned, there are all these different categories. Hope you can have a quick read of those. And this is just sort of a signpost for people to steer them through how they decide who can see the information they're putting on there. We've since actually islanderized or Boigurized it a bit more than what it sort of shows there. A repeat map of the existing one, and the new one, the new cluster. When we went around to do this expansion, we made sure that we took people like Nelson so that people in the newer communities could hear what it was like rather than hear it from a bureaucrat like me trying to sell them a program. They want to hear from firsthand from these guys like traditional owners who've been through it, and they can talk one-on-one to Nelson. We've also had a few other guys, Troy, who was there as well. So yeah, so they're the places we're up to at the moment. I'll flash through a couple of quick pictures. You want to talk to these ones?
Yeah, that's on Boigu Island community.
Just our consultations with the different communities. Melbiag, once again, people all come along, have a listen. Nelson talking at Kubian. And the Council of Elders at St. Paul's on Moa Island also. Okay. The outcome was that they all supported. The way we set up the original one was a standalone computer. People were concerned, they just didn't want anywhere to go zooming off through wires or satellites anywhere else. So we started with a program and a system that lets these guys control. There are pros and cons to all these systems. The system they have at Boigu basically very difficult to maintain if something goes wrong, as always happens with computers, of course. We have a couple of others in this newer rollout, the new cluster, who are keen to get it web-based, because Torres Strait, we got about 9,000 Torres Strait Islanders living in Torres Strait. 2/3 more than that live on the mainland of Australia. A lot of them gone, so a lot of people still with knowledge from the mainland want to have access to this database as well. So we've tried, the next phase is to be able to do that now. Lots of training. We've also streamlined it a bit more. As I said, we'd be there forever if we're doing one at a time. We've got 15 communities, we'd be there for 15 years if we did it that way. So basically we're training our rangers and our senior rangers, supervisors, to to be able to do that, and it's sort of more streamlined process rather than having the consultants up there all the time. Just some pictures of the guys doing the training. Once again, our achievements. Got the bucks, consulted extensively, got the commitments, being trained at the moment, and just further refinement as we go along. Not pushing this fast, it's at a speed that people are comfortable with. A couple of lessons learned along the way. As I said, need to be very well planned. Need to be able to accommodate changes on communities all the time. Okay, sorry about that quick wrap up, but happy to take some questions on not just the TEK, any of the programs that I mentioned earlier, very briefly. Yep. We've only got time for one question, so it better be a good one.
You use the cyber tracker that I track
Yes.
PA for those who don't understand. We pretty much got the same. Do you have a separate application, or like we have W application which we use for the chip tech, or there's the one that now is trying to provide?
Yeah, we use that system, but we also, as Nelson said, do other video, audio recordings as well. And we're in the process of working out how ranger reporting can be built into it as well. So at this stage, it's a TEK program, traditional. Yeah, but it can accommodate them all. Yeah, that's just, we use that one. It's just one of the forms we're using it. Okay, I'm just going to let Nelson do a wrap up. Sorry about the rush, folks, but we've got a big Torres Strait delegation here. We're happy to talk outside or anytime as you see us down the track. I'm just going to hand over to Nelson to thank you.
Very last thing I wanted to say, if we are the indigenous people of our countries, our nations, land and sea, islands, all on tight to our culture and tradition, because our culture and our tradition will take us back where we belong. Our so our Khmer so means thank you.